Good morning. Welcome to today's Planning Committee meeting. I'm Councillor John Ward and will be chairing the Planning Committee meeting today. On the top table, we have officers Chris Rickman, Tracy Lincoln, my Vice Chairman, Councillor Karen Vincent, and Officer Dawn Matthews. The fire safety notice will now be read out.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're not expecting a fire drill today, so if the fire alarm does sound, then we'll need to evacuate the building. There's two routes that you could do to take this. One is through the double doors where you came in this morning, and the other is to this door to your right there. Please note that you should not use the lift in the event of a fire, and in the event of evacuation, we need to meet to the left of the driveway at the main entrance to Thorpe Lodge. Thank you.
The meeting is being live streamed. Members of the public are welcome to film proceedings as long as they are not disruptive to the conduct of the meeting. If anyone wishes to film or record the meeting, please will you identify yourselves? No? Please can you all ensure that your mobile phones and electronic devices are turned to silent. Councillors, please do not use your mobile phone whilst the committee is in session. We will have comfort breaks at various times throughout the meeting. If you must use your mobile, then please leave the room. However, you will appreciate this could result in you not being able to vote on the matter under discussion at the time you leave the room. The order of business is as set out on the agenda. Members of the public can only speak if prior arrangements have been made in accordance with the Council's scheme of public speaking. The time allocated is a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker, with a maximum of 15 minutes per category. Only people who have registered to speak will be able to address the committee. The order will be as follows. The planning officer will present the application. Public speakers will then be asked to present their case, followed by questions from members of the committee to clarify something the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The order of public speaking is Parish Town Council first, followed by objectors, then supporters. Council members who are not members of this committee will then be invited to speak for the allocated time of a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker. This will be followed by questions from members of the committee. Again, these questions will only be to clarify something the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The committee will then discuss and determine the application. Finally, there is no provision for members of the public to circulate documents, photographs, etc. at the meeting. Are there any questions before I open the meeting? No? Thank you. Then first item is declarations of interest, please. And I'll just say myself, item 2 was discussed at Sproston Town Council meeting when I was present, but I did not vote on that item. Councillor Vincent?
Thank you, Chairman. The same declaration as you, item 2 was at the town.
Okay, thank you. Right, minutes of the meeting are held on the 23rd of March for accuracy, please. Any comments? Are you happy that I sign those as a true record of that meeting? Thank you. Right, we move on to the applications from page 7, and the first one is 2021-2125, Manson Plantation, Shorthorn Road, Stratton Strawless, and Officer Chris Rickman, I believe, is presenting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Item 1 then is application 2021-2125, Manson Plantation, Shorthorn Road in Stratton Strawless. The application seeks a permanent change of use of the land to a construction and plant training area. The reason for the application being reported to Planning Committee is because it is recommended for approval contrary to policy GC2. This is because the site is outside of any defined settlement limit and the proposals do not comply with a specific allocation or policy which allows for such development outside of these limits. The key considerations, therefore, are the principle of the development and whether there are any material considerations that allow for development, as well as the impact on the character of the area, residential amenity, highway safety, and biodiversity and ecology. So just to put the site and the application into a bit more context, I'll just go through the slides. So the first slide you can see here is showing the red line around the application site. And then you've got a blue line, which you hopefully can make out where the mouse is now going, which is around the kind of wider rectangular parcel of land. And that is land within the applicant's ownership. This is a satellite view, which hopefully will just give a bit more context. So the site is immediately adjacent to Cromer Road, which runs down the east side of the site. And that obviously links Stratton Strawless. You've got Hevingham to the north, and then the nearest village is Hainford to the south. As you come off Cromer Road, you're only a short distance onto Shortthorne Road, which is quite a long road, before you get to the access of the site on the north side of the road. Just another bit of context, really. Woodland View Mobile Home Park is on the opposite side of Cromer Road, and then Shortthorne Road itself is home to a variety of different residential and commercial uses, scattered type development with lots of different areas of woodland, pockets of woodland in between. This is just to tell a bit of a story then as to how we've got to where we are today. So in 2004, there was a planning permission granted for a holiday lodge park, which and this plan shows the proposals for that. So that application approved 98 holiday lodges and various different associated development, including tennis courts, a swimming pool, a restaurant, a reception area, and a sales kind of retail unit. That application was commenced, and the council has since over time accepted that is an extant permission. In terms of that application, the red line was actually around the whole of this site. As you can see, the development is mainly contained within this black dotted line, and then there was various woodland trails and walks around the rest of the site. In terms of the more recent history, since 2018, the parcel of land with the dotted black line around it has been used for construction and plant training. Originally, this was without permission, and then there was a temporary approval granted in 2021, which granted permission until January 2022. This has mainly, like I say, been around the dotted black line. And originally, when this application came in, it was for a further temporary period to carry on the training within that area. During the course of the application, two things have happened. First of all, the red line application site that I've shown you previously has been reduced in size. So it now, where you can see this kind of central spine road, it now has been reduced. So it kind of mainly goes from that spine road and then this parcel around to the west. The other thing to note is it was originally submitted for a further temporary permission. Because the council felt that it was acceptable in line with the MPPF guidance, it was considered that rather than continuing to approve various temporary permissions, it was better to allow a permanent use if we felt it was acceptable. And that's what the latest consultations have been on. So this is a zoomed in version, satellite view version of the red line. The access is just off this plan, but off Shortthorne Road. And then there are two portable buildings which are used for the training purposes. And then you can see where the site has been cleared or partially cleared. You've still got some copses of trees within the site, and then you've got some cleared areas where they use for the training purposes. From my understanding, they tend to kind of work in a certain area for a month or two. When it gets too muddy, they'll kind of move on to another area within the site. But they mainly, from when I've been out to the site, they mainly use this kind of larger cleared area here. This plan, again, shows pretty much what you've seen already, but the kind of areas in green show the copses of trees, and it's proposed that further protection will be given to them trees going forward if this application was to be approved, in the form of timber posts and rope, which is effectively to act as a further marker showing those copses of trees going forward. There are already some markers around some of the trees, but not around all of them copses, so it's proposed to condition that going forward to allow to ensure that those retained trees are protected adequately going forward. And this is just showing that tree protection specification in a bit more detail. So moving on to some site photographs, which hopefully give you a bit better context. This is standing at the access to the site. On this day, the training centre was closed. But you can see that there are some views, certainly from the access of the portable buildings, which you can hopefully just about make out, some white portable buildings here. The actual training itself with the kind of construction machinery is taking place mainly behind this wooded area, kind of dense trees to the west hand side. So what you can see here is that any kind of views are well, very limited from the road. The training exercises actually take place over 200 meters from the access. This is a view slightly further along Shortthorn Road to the west, just to give you an idea as to what the view is away from the access. So again, you can see those portable buildings, and there's some toilet facilities there as well. But it's considered, as I've set out in my report in the agenda, that it's not considered that these are significantly detrimental to the character of the area, especially given that there's no kind of footpath in this location. Any kind of views would be kind of glimpse views from majority of the time from people driving past. And certainly the construction training itself set back so far into the site that it's not considered that it would be any harm to the character of the area. So these are just some views from the access in either direction. So again, gives you a good feel of what the immediate surroundings are, and shows that there's good visibility at the access. And then these are views into the site. So just inside the access, you've got the parking area and then portable buildings that I just referred to. And then this photo is me standing in pretty much the same position, but instead of looking west, I'm now looking north along that kind of central spine road, which you saw in the 2004 plan. And then this is further along that track, walking in a straight line. And then you've got the access that kind of veers off to the west, which is where the main kind of construction plant training is taking place. This is a photo of a day where the training was taking place. This was actually taken, I think, January 2022, so a little time ago. But the reason why I've included this photo is because there was training taking place. I've been more recently, and there hasn't been any kind of diggers or excavators on site, so I thought this was a good photo to use. So what you can see here is, like I say, there was 2 or 3 people training at this point in time, and there's a raised kind of mound of earth there where the diggers will kind of drive up, load something down from the bucket, and then reverse back down or turn and drive down. Again, just showing the kind of machinery that's on site. And then this is moving around. So this is me looking south now. So the access and the cabins are in the background behind these trees. But you can see the kind of scale of the operation at this time. So that you've got 2 diggers and a dumper there. You've got some posts here, which they use to kind of slalom round as part of the training exercise. When I have been since, the site isn't as muddy as what it was here. Like I say, this was in January 2022, but obviously it gets muddy because of the nature of the exercise. The other thing to note is, as you can see here, I talked about the tree protection. There are some posts and ropes that you can see here, and then on the following slide you can see them again around some of the trees already in place. And like I say, we would condition that so we can enhance that, if you like, going forward. So I'll just leave you with the location plan, which you've seen already, just as I go through to kind of summarise the rest of the appraisal. So with regards to the trees on site, the tree report submitted with the application states that the operations are undertaken within the areas already cleared, and that there is sufficient space for this to continue without the requirement to remove or impact upon the retained trees. With the additional tree markers in place, it is considered that there will be no significant harm to the trees going forward. As set out already in my report, it is considered that the proposals will also not cause any harm and appearance of the area. With regards to the impact on residential amenity, conditions are proposed to restrict the hours of operation, the number of trainees on site at any one time, and also to add a condition to restrict reversing alarms on the training vehicles to be broadband specification only. So this effectively means that it's more of a muffled kind of sound rather than the kind of more audible beeping sound when the vehicles are reversing. So it's considered that actually going forward, hopefully there'd be, or there should be less noise on site than what has taken place in recent years. The Council's Environmental Health team have raised no concerns regarding noise pollution, and given the screening of the site and the distance from the nearest residential properties, it's considered that there would not be any detrimental impact upon residential amenity. The Highway Authority have raised no objection, and given the training use results in a, it is considered that it is acceptable from a highway safety perspective. With regards to the ecology and biodiversity on the site area has been reduced during the course of the application. And again, given the fallback position of the Holiday Lodge Park, it is considered that that which is considered to result in a greater impact on habitats, it's considered to be acceptable, especially given that we are also looking at ecological enhancements in the form of 10 bat boxes to be installed on site. So overall, although the application is contrary to policy GC2, the proposals will support employment in the area through the staff running the course, and also from improving the employability of attendees in the construction sector. The application is therefore in accordance with Policy 5 of the JCS in this regard. In addition, commercial development has already been accepted on the site, which is an extant permission, and the planning history is considered to be a significant material consideration in this case. It is considered that such a use would not be appropriate within a built-up residential area or within more open countryside due to the impacts that this would have on residential amenity and on the visual harm that this could create. Given that the site has already been cleared, how well the site is screened, the distance from nearest properties, it is considered that the application is considered appropriate for the proposed use. It is therefore considered that there is merit in granting planning permission for the construction plant training, despite the conflict with the policy already identified. As set out in the agenda, given the extant holiday park permission, if this application was to be approved, it would be subject to a non-implementation Section 106 agreement. In effect, this would remove the possibility of two permissions being implemented simultaneously. So if it was approved, then if the Holiday Lodge Park was ever to be commenced further, then the construction plant training would need to cease with immediate effect. So overall, it is therefore recommended to delegate authority to the Assistant Director of Planning to approve the application, subject to the satisfactory completion of the Section 106 agreement, and also in line with the conditions listed in the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Firstly, I just need to address Councillor Leggett and say I'm sorry, but as you were not here for the whole presentation, you may not take part in the discussion or the vote on this item. Thank you. Okay. Right, councillors, any questions for the officer, please? Yes, Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the presentation. I've just got two questions, if I may. Do we have any details of the traffic movements of those heavy vehicles? Do they remain on site or do they come backwards and forwards to the site?
I'm not sure if they remain on site. I don't think they remain on site all the time because I've been out. I went out last week, and when it was closed, and there wasn't any vehicles on site. As I show on the photos, there's only a small number. I think there was 3 on that day. So I don't think it's significant vehicular movements. And certainly, again, if we refer to the fallback position of there being a Holiday Lodge Park of 98 units and the traffic movements that would generate, it certainly will be significantly less than that.
Thank you. My second question is picking up some of the comments made by residents and the local community. And on page 13 of the report, representations refer to a condition on previous permission stating that the approved use is not considered as a suitable permanent activity in this location. My question is, what's changed? Please, thank you.
Yeah, it is accepted that when the application was previously granted a temporary permission, the condition or the reason for that condition did state that it wasn't acceptable in the long term. Ultimately, this application is being judged on its own merits at this point in time. And I suppose, come to a different conclusion to that. In terms of what's changed, not a significant amount has changed, apart from the fact that they have been on the site for a period of time, which I suppose shows that there hasn't been that significant detrimental impact in that period of time since that temporary permission. But as I say, ultimately, I've assessed the application, all the different things I've mentioned, and come to that conclusion.
If I can just add to that as well, and obviously, what are reasons why you might grant a temporary permission? It may be to understand the impacts of use. It may be that it is a transient nature, i.e. Temporary mobile classrooms, for example, for a school. But what is clear from the National Planning Practice guidance is that rarely you should continue to grant temporary consents. When you judge something to be acceptable, it should be acceptable. You shouldn't have to put a condition on that to make that a temporary requirement. So clearly the case officer has assessed that the planning impacts are acceptable, and therefore it is acceptable for a permanent use.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Holland.
Yeah, this may be inexperience on my part, but you say it's contrary to policy GC2. When did that come into force? I mean, because it would appear that there has been permission granted for something in 2004. Did that not apply then, or is it a slightly different concept?
In terms of GC2, that was set out in the development management plan, which came into force in 2015. There would have been a similar policy in terms of kind of location of development at that point in 2004. But ultimately, obviously, that was considered acceptable for whatever reason back then. A GC2, like I say, came into force in 2015.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. I know you noted that the Highway Authority has no objections, but Power 4.8 refers to the fact that the authority would, if you'd be minded to approve the application, be grateful for the inclusion of the following condition. Should there's a note there then refers to visible displays, but there's nothing on the list of conditions at the end if we agree to approve relating to anything to do with displays or highways.
Apologies if that's been missed. But yeah, ultimately, if it was approved, then we would be happy to add that visibility condition in. I think visibility is okay at the site, but yeah, if they need to kind of do anything to improve that, then we can add that in. That's not a problem.
Any further questions from councillors? Yes, Councillor Holland.
Is it 10 bat boxes or 20 bat boxes?
It's 10. Originally, pardon. It was originally proposed to be 20. That was that was requested from our ecology officer. That was when the site was in its revised form, so it's a wider site, and the ecology officer asked for the site to be reduced. Given that they reduced the site down, the applicants proposed 10, and the ecology officer had sight of that and said that that was acceptable.
Any further questions from councillors? No, thank you. We'll go to public speaking then. If I can call Mr. Drake and Mr. Mayhow to come forward, please. And if you decide who's going first, and then introduce yourselves, and you have 5 minutes each. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Mr. Drake. I'm on chair of the parish council, so I'm representing that. The things what we are more concerned on is sort of the wildlife, and the things what we do want to bring up is that they were there so long, even though we reported them before they was actually told to put in an application for planning. They didn't actually do it, they were told to, which was from 2018 to 2021, which we thought was a little bit out of order, seeing it was so long they were on the site illegally. And Mr. Howe, what would you say?
Well, I'm also a parish councillor, Martin Howard. I also just live down the road, a bit further down Shortthorne Road. I'm just amazed that someone can get initial planning permission for holiday cottages, which would end up being nicely presented, and we end up with a development that for 50% of the year probably looks like the Somme, destroying all the local grasslands and bits and pieces. I know they've got bits of trees that they can retain, but to my mind, it's rather inappropriate that a development like this should be allowed to go ahead. And also, I still cannot believe that the planning has been going on for so long with so many temporary allowances, and then suddenly we're told that it would be made a permanent fixture. It's just one of those things. But as a local and a thing, I would certainly strongly object to this application going ahead.
The other one, what we are concerned about is that if it becomes industrial, is it industrial land then?
Does this also make a precedent then for further development in that area? If this is allowed, do we then suddenly find other things creeping in along that stretch of road and damaging the ecological sites that there are in those woods and everything? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that all you have to say? Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Do any councillors have questions for the two gentlemen, please? No? Thank you. I'll call forward Mrs. Chamberlain then, please. And when you're ready, Mrs. Chamberlain, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a resident living opposite Manson Plantation. I have to say, I'm appalled by those photographs of the site. I've lived here for nearly 50 years, and I'm very, very concerned about what's going to happen to this piece of land. It's supposed to be out of a settlement area and in the countryside. You've said as much in the previous application. You said that it wasn't suitable for a permanent activity in this location, and you referred to needing control of its cessation in accordance with policy GC4 of the Broadland DMD PD 2015. Now, this has been going on since 2018. They put their planning application in 2019, and it took 2 years and 4 months to consent to a 6 months temporary use. And the reason for that is because you're saying it isn't suitable. So why now is it suddenly suitable? It surely is not suitable. The thing is that due to these long delays, you've allowed this to become established, and it should never have been allowed to become established. When you look at those photographs of that land, waterlogged land, and you're saying that it's okay to have protected species next to that because Area 2 on your map is next to areas 1, 3, and 4. So how are you going to protect these species? They're not the only things living there. It's become an important habitat for wildlife. If we don't start caring about the countryside, we won't have any countryside left. And to say this is dense woodland is, well, you can see it isn't dense woodland. It might be dense woodland in parts, but I can tell you that living opposite that, I can see those machines from my driveway because there's a break in the trees. In the winter, there's not much cover. And also, this bleep, bleep, bleep all day long from the diggers going around. Of course, it depends where they're working on site, I accept that. But it's incredibly annoying and intrusive to the enjoyment of my living where I live, and I do care about where I live. So there's a camouflage of trees, but that shouldn't distract from the fact that it is outside of any defined settlement boundary, and so in planning terms is in the countryside. The other thing that concerns me hugely is that it says in the report that the machines primarily used are diggers and dumpers, but what will stop heavier construction equipment coming along there that we have to put up with as residents? If you're minded to bit this change of use, then will you please include a condition limiting the machinery to diggers and dumpers as currently used? Because at least that will help mitigate the impact it has on our daily lives. There's a 9-metre scaffold tower. It was noted in the previous delegated report. It refers to training for operating telescopic mobile cranes. Is it part of this application? Do you know what equipment is going to be brought onto this site? I mean, that's hugely important to residents and the future of this site. I'm sorry, I'm incredibly nervous, so I apologise for that. You have to realise that Manson Plantation provides an important habitat for a variety of wildlife and vitally for protected species. And as I've already said, Area 2 is bang up against the construction site, which has been absolutely destroyed by these machines. Now, when you talk about it providing jobs, I accept that it might be providing some work for 1 or 2 out of 7 of the staff this company employs. But there's been 5 years to find somewhere more suitable than a woodland. If it had been in open ground, I already have been told that you never would have considered it. Surely this is somewhat even worse in some respects, to put it in a woodland where there are creatures living which are supposed to be protected. It just doesn't make any sense to
Mrs. Chamberlain,
commercialise
you've
part.
had your 5 minutes. Thank you.
you.
If you just stay there a moment. Do any councillors have questions for this speaker, please? No? Oh, yes, Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Mrs. Chamberlain. I can see how passionate you are about this, so thank you for telling us about that. In terms of the operating hours, from your point of view, could you share with us what you see them as at the moment?
The concern I have more than anything is what's going to happen down the line. That's the biggest concern of mine. You allow this to become permanent, what control will you then have? Because you're not going to monitor it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, please? Yes, Councillor Holland.
You refer to the, yes, and I would agree. I thank you very much because you put a very clear case there. But, you refer to the beeping. That's the thing that actually concerns me quite a lot, because of course these trucks do reverse and make lots of beeping, and this could be, I would imagine, quite intrusive. I believe they're saying that there will be a restriction on the amount of beeping. Do you think that would help improve your how you feel about it if they weren't allowed to make those sorts of noises?
Anything will help that cuts down that dreadful and annoying noise. But I'm trying to get across here how really unsuitable this is.
Yes,
And
okay, thank you. You can only
just
answer the
like if
direct.
I
You can
may
only
just-
answer. No, you can only answer the direct question that's
Thank
put to
you.
you. Thank you. Is Mr. Alan Miles here, please? Would you like to come forward, sir? Now, do you wish to speak?
No, it's just
No.
if there's any operational questions. to
Yeah,
either of
Mr.
those.
Miles is the applicant. So he doesn't wish to speak himself, but he will answer any questions. So if any councillors have questions for Mr. Miles, please. Yes, Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Just going back to this business of reversing alarms, in the recommendation number 5, it says reversing alarms shall be of the broadband reversing alarm specification only. Forgive my ignorance, but what does that mean in reality?
My understanding of that is it's a reduced, more muffled noise to the standard one that has to be put in place from a health and safety perspective. So it it is less piercing noise.
Any other questions? Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning. My question is one around operating hours. I obviously would like to know what your current operating hours are and what you plan to do in the future. And my other is about the equipment that you propose to bring on site in the future.
Excuse me. The current working hours are 9 till 5, Monday to Friday, 9 till 12 on a Saturday. I don't believe we've done any Saturday work for at least 12 months. And realistically, they're normally off-site by 4 o'clock at the very latest. With regards to the plant, I totally understand the questions about the future. It is diggers, dumpers, a telehandler, which isn't a crane, it's just it's like a digger but with the forklift tines on, and would be a small roller machine as well. There is no intentions and there can be restrictions on any large equipment, no cranes, nothing any bigger than that, because we're not a training company that will focus on anything outside those restrictions, outside those vehicles.
Okay. Any further questions, please? No. If you'd like to resume your seat, then, sir. Thank you. And Councillor Roper, please, if you'd like to come forward. And you have 5 minutes from when you start.
Good morning, Councillor Dan Roper. I'm the county member for the site. Unfortunately, the local member is away at present. Referring back to the application outcome in 2019 and that decision letter, which says quite clearly that approved use is not considered to be a suitable permanent activity in the location. And you can see why, because there are clear and compelling conflicts with policy, as set out on page 14 in 5.5. You can see clearly contrary to GC2 and policy 17 of the JCS. And the question is, what has changed? And nothing has changed. The only thing that has changed in that time is that the temporary consent was given until January 2022, and the applicant hasn't moved off site. That's the only thing that has changed, in that they haven't gone along with the conditions put upon them. Now, this temporary permission came about following a meeting which myself, Councillor Nice, and the Parish Council and the Planning Officer attended. And the intention of that was to give a 6-month window for the applicant to cease their activities, to clear the site at the end of that 6-month period, and to find some alternative. That was the understanding that myself and the Parish Council had with the resolution of that earlier application. Going back, if you're seeing this as a fresh application, you're looking at something industrial within a period of woodland, in a section of woodland, totally contrary to policy. Why on earth would you pass it? If you look at it in terms of the extant planning permission for the holiday lodges, as Mr. Howard has set out, this is a totally different activity taking place, which is causing regular disturbance to the land. And rather than the holiday lodge plan, which had its own landscape and protection plan for 25 years, this doesn't. So I think in your considerations, you should set aside, if you can, that extant planning permission. And for me, as a member of this council, what type of council are we? In that, do we allow someone to operate on a site without permission for a number of years? Then we give them temporary permission for 6 months. They do not move at the end of that 6 months. And then we go and decide we will give them permanent permission, totally contrary to policy, despite all of that. What would that say about Broadland and its approach to planning is my submission. You've got good grounds to reject this. It is completely contrary to policy, and I would urge you to do so. Thank you. I'm shorter than usual, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Roper, please? No, if you'd like to resume your seat, please. And it's over to you, councillors, please. Councillor Adams.
Yeah, it's not often I agree completely and utterly with Councillor Roper, but on this occasion I do, because I've read also 5.5, and I have to say again, I am absolutely astounded at the recommendation from the officers. Now, if you read 5.5, it says policy GC2 of the DMDPD, which is our main core planning strategy, seeks to locate new development within defined settlement limits. This isn't. But outside of these limits, it permits development where it accords with the specific allocation and/or policy of the development plan and does not result in any significant adverse impact. Can any of you sitting around this table argue that this will not have a significant detrimental impact? The site is outside of any defined settlement limit and is not allocated for any purpose. In addition, the proposals do not accord with the specific policy in the development plan that allows for development outside of the settlement limit, and as such, the proposals are contrary to policy GC2 and of the DMDPD and policy 17 of the JCS. And I move refusal, Chairman, on those two policy grounds. Thank you.
Yes, I can't agree with that myself. I think we've got to look at the situation today. We've got a business that these training operators, they've got to be trained somewhere. They've got to be trained in those sort of conditions often. And the business has been operating for some considerable time. The business has been operating for some considerable time with no significant problems at all. So I don't agree with your view. I'm not asking you to speak, Mr. Adams. You've had your speech. All right, Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Chairman. I must admit I have serious concerns about this application. The question I asked earlier is what has changed. Councillor Roper's picked up on the same point. I think I heard earlier is that it's proven that hasn't had a major impact on residential amenity, but I've heard different this morning. For all of those reasons, I can't support this application, and I would second Councillor Adams' refusal.
Yes.
Can I just clarify a couple of points I've heard just in terms of steering members? So I think it is evident we don't have a policy and an allocation policy that allows for every eventuality in terms of employment in our countryside locations. And clearly this is one such type of use. We wouldn't expect such use to be within our settlement limits, clearly because of the nature of that. So obviously we have JCS Policy 5 that is supportive of employment and employment in rural areas where that's appropriate and acceptable. And clearly in terms of, yes, you've got your development plan, GC2, in terms of where that allocates development, but you also must have regard to those material considerations which might direct you to depart from that policy. So obviously that's the strategic emphasis of JC5 in terms of that employment. And secondly, the site-specific considerations of this site in terms of its impacts. I think if I can secondly come on to in terms of the residential impacts, I think what the report has set out is that it's not suggesting anyway that there are no impacts. There are rarely developments that have absolutely no impacts whatsoever. What it is suggesting is subject to condition, which the NPPF requires us to do. Do not refuse something where you can make that acceptable via condition, but subject to conditions, this application can be made acceptable and in overall accordance with your plan. So I think that's just what I want to come to in terms of if you find harm with the application and seek to refuse that, we would need to understand the specifics around what those particular impacts are, given that you've got your statutory consultees advising, subject to conditions, that there are no harms from some of those particular perspectives. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, the reason this has come to committee is because it's contrary to policy. It's what it says in the first paragraph. So, and it's for us to make the decision. And I note the comments that have been made, but I also note the officer's follow-up explanation, where in fact this type of activity would not be suitable within a built-up area. So where then do we train construction workers for our construction sites? And I think that's the issue we have. And there's two ways of looking at it. I personally think with the conditions attached, including the additional condition for the Bedford to highways and the display, and also a condition limiting the use of the current plant at the minute, so there is no danger of larger, heavier plant being moved to site. I see no reason why we can't approve this application, but I know we've got to vote on the proposal put forward. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Yes, Councillor Karimi.
I was actually horrified to see the photos of that land being dug up. The amount of biodiversity on that land is being destroyed because of that. And I wouldn't say it is in particularly a rural area. I go along that road quite a lot. There are lots of residential properties along that road which are going to be disturbed by this. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to vote against this.
Anybody else wish to speak? Yes, Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just going back to 5.6, referring to Policy 5 of the JCS. It does say Policy 5 is wide-ranging. Amongst other things, it seeks to promote appropriate new businesses. Now, I would suggest that this is not a new business, and on the basis of the evidence presented to us today, I would also doubt that it's actually appropriate for the location because of the damage it's doing. I accept it's got to be done somewhere. Why can't they train on building sites which are not yet being built on, for example? Thank you, Chair.
Does anybody else wish to speak? No, well, we've got a proposal for refusal from Councillor Adams, and that was seconded by, who seconded it? Councillor Vincent. Oh, who seconded it? Councillor Folger seconded it. We need the reasons, Councillor Adams.
It clearly stated that it's completely contrary to policy GC2 of the DMDPD and policy 17 of the JCS, which the planning officers wholly admit it is.
I think we would struggle with that because what's the identified harm from? So GC2 doesn't wholly prevent development in the countryside. So what are those harms that would mean that you would refuse that application? So I totally get that you feel that there are other locations where this could be suitably located, but what about this particular site is that issue?
I think, Chairman, with the greatest respect, we've heard from the local residents about the harm that could be done to the ecological situation, that habitats could be destroyed. Having a look at that land, I would say it's completely unsuitable for what is being proposed. And if they want to go back and develop the holiday site, I think fine. But the fact they haven't done so since 2002, whenever, it's unlikely I would have thought they would have done so. If you've got particular policies that say that these sorts of things should not be allowed outside of a certain criteria, and this is outside of that criteria, I can't see what you're arguing about.
Just want to clarify, because obviously, we get a refusal, we'll have to defend that on appeal. So I just want to be clear in terms of how we would defend that around protecting the council for costs and acting unreasonably. So what you're suggesting is in terms of the ecological impact, you've got harm in terms of the ecology. So obviously you've got our ecologist stating that that's acceptable in terms of the activity within the site, and we've had an assessment provided. But what I'm hearing is that, so you're concerned around the continued activity on the site and potentially that pressure around the periphery of that site and the continued activity harming that site.
The habitats also of the wildlife, Tracy, as well.
Okay. So what you are concluding then is that I don't think you are acknowledging that GC2 allows development outside of the settlement limits. However, recognising that that is where there isn't significant adverse impact, and you
Yeah.
also find significant adverse impact in terms of the ecological impacts
Yeah.
of the scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy, thank you.
Okay, we'll go to the vote now. The vote is for refusal. All those in favour of refusal, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Chairman.
And against?
1, 2.
Okay, thank you. So that application is refused. Thank you. I think we'll take a 5-minute break, please. Thank you.
That's all.
Application 2, 2023-0462, Technology House, Roundtree Way, Sproston, being presented by Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the application we have before us for item 2 is application 2023-0462, which is the application at Technology House on Roundtree Way in Sproston, which is on an existing employment area. The change of use that we have before us is a change of use to a proposed rage room, which comes under use class ED, which has been redefined under the changes to the use class order back in 2021, which thought it'd be useful to go through the definition. So that's used for indoor sport, recreation or fitness, not involving motorized vehicles or firearms, principally to visiting members of the public. So that's they're proposing it as a rage room, but that's the use that falls under in planning terms. Recommendation that we're proposing is to delegate authority to the Assistant Director of Planning to approve with the conditions in the report, subject to no material issues being raised during the reconsultation, which will expire on the 22nd of April. The reason the application is before you is because the proposal is contrary to policy E1 of the DMDPD. So just for a bit of context, so the site is located here as shown on Roundtree Way. So Technology House is here. So to give you a little bit more context, we've got the surrounding employment area, which it sits in with the Royal Mail Depot and other commercial uses along Roundtree Way. We've got, I'm sure you're familiar with the retail park, which is adjacent the site as well, containing Homebase and DFS and Dunelm and other businesses along there, and the wider employment site, which runs around Salhouse Road, Mousehold Lane, and Roundtree Way itself. And just to show you for context, so the pink area shown on the plan here shows the area covered within that employment use, which E1 policy E1 relates to. So just for that little bit more of context. So the principle of the change is covered under that policy E1, which defines employment uses. So it seeks to safeguard the employment zones for employment uses, which the DMDPD defines as just B1, B2, and B8 uses. And as discussed, this use now falls under use class ED, so would therefore be contrary to that policy effectively. Policy E2 also states that it should be demonstrated other employment uses should be unviable and subject to 12 months marketing within the supporting text of the policy. The site's been vacant since October 2022, has been marketed since around mid-August. The balance, therefore, we have in planning terms before us is effectively balancing the potential harms of such a use in an existing employment area against the potential benefit of a different use, which, whilst is not the employment use which is defined in policy E1, would still be an employment use which would still have some employment of employing four people. The view of the planning officer is effectively that whilst this would represent a use which is outside the policy, it would still predominantly remain within an employment use, and on balance is assessed to be acceptable and would not in itself significantly undermine the development plan via this departure itself. Also, just for note, there's a condition to ensure the premises would only be used under that ED use class effectively, so under that definition, and we'd also have within that condition to revert the site to B8 use should that use ever lapse. So it would effectively revert back to a use within the definition of what E1 states. Just to make members aware as well, prior to it going out to reconsultation and when the report itself was originally drafted and should have been circulated on your updates, the local highway authority have commented on the proposal and raised no objection, as they hadn't previously commented to it, subject to a condition that parking remains in perpetuity, which we've proposed as a condition anyway on the application. So just to go through the site plan, so this shows the site plan from what the applicants have proposed. So it shows the 12 parking spaces, of which they've shown some for customers and some for the actual employees of the site as well, showing the 3 rage rooms within the building that they're seeking to propose. So just to show you, this is the front of the site from Roundtree Way itself, with some parking area at the front as shown on that previous plan. We've got the site looking northeast along Roundtree Way, so down towards the site here. We've got the view looking southwest along Roundtree Way towards Mousehold Lane, with the Royal Mail Depot you can see there. This just shows the area just to the side of the site, which has the parking area as part of that, and obviously shows the hatch there as well. And then this just shows the parking area just at the front of the site as well. As you can note from the photos, there is double yellow lines all the way across, all the way along Roundtree Way as well there, just for some context. So that's the application before you that we're recommending authority to the Assistant Director of Planning to approve, with the conditions listed in the report, subject to no material issues being raised during the reconsultation, which expires on the 22nd of April. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for the officer, please? Yes, Councillor Karimi.
Is 12 parking spaces considered enough for the amount of people who can attend there?
Yeah, we've consulted the highway or local highway authority, and they haven't raised any objection with that site plan as proposed.
Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to ask a similar question about the parking, given the hourly slots, whether that's sufficient, and with the yellow lines on the road. Just referring to page 25, 4.3, where highways say further comments will be provided on receipt. Did we receive any further comments? Thank you.
Yes, we did receive those further comments, and they've, as I mentioned in my presentation, so they have considered that there's no objection from them, subject to that condition for the parking to be placed on any approval if we were minded to grant one.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Leggett, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for clarification, you may have covered this, but in 1.3 on page 23, you say which can be booked for 1 hour slots. There would be sufficient space in the building to create more in the future. Whether you made reference to that or whether that's covered, but I want to make sure that that isn't just included, that they can go and increase outside what has been planned. Could you clarify that for me?
Yeah, so I think the principally what we're looking at here is the change of use to fall into that use class. At the moment, they're proposing those 3 rage rooms as shown on that plan. Obviously, there is sufficient space in there if they did wish to increase their offering. But at this stage, that's what the applicants are proposing. And at this stage, we wouldn't have any further control. Obviously, you can make internal changes without planning permission. So effectively, we're just granting the straight change of use on this into that use class from the B8 use, if that sufficiently answers your question.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Holland.
So when you say there is room to make more, are we talking sort of 10 more or 1 more or 2? I mean, because that will affect parking, won't it? Because obviously if you've only got 12 spaces, if you're going to add, if you've got 3 rooms, that seems to me acceptable. But if you're going to end up with 10 rooms, then clearly it's not going to be acceptable. So I think that would be my concern, the parking issue.
Yeah, so I think probably from our point of view, obviously the applicants aren't here today to kind of justify their future plans for it. Obviously, what they're proposing at the moment is the three rooms that we have proposed. I think from a local highway point of view, obviously they've looked at the size of the sort of floor space of the, they're aware of what the building has, and they're content in terms of that for parking to provide, for this use class effectively that we're granting the change for. So they've come back as the sort of the sort of experts on highway matters and said that they believe the amount of parking proposed is acceptable.
Yes, Councillor Karimi.
Is there an accessible entrance to this? Because it looks like there's steps going up there. So anybody in wheelchairs want to access these rage rooms? And will they have a disabled parking space?
So I'm just going to have a quick look. So there is the sort of roller shutter door access to the rear. I don't know if there is an access to the rear of the building itself, but yeah, I don't know if that's something that they could change. Yeah, there's steps at the front to the main entrance of the building at the moment as proposed.
Can we add that to the conditions that they have an accessible entrance to this, please?
I think there probably is an access at the back where they obviously could potentially accommodate people because they're here. So there is a flat access. I think that has to be covered under building regulations. We can't condition that under the planning permission. But I think there is opportunity for wheelchairs to be able to get into the building if they so choose, and the applicant.
I mean, we could add an informative in terms of clarification around the disabled access. So absolutely. I mean, certainly in terms of the building regulation requirements, and I'm not au fait with all of those in terms of how they utilise an existing building for this particular type of use. However, we clearly have ability in terms of those roller shutters to be able to facilitate such access. But we can put an informative note on there in terms of the disability access.
Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just picking up the consultation from the Town Council on page 24. It wasn't just about parking spaces, but also considerate disposal of waste, which presumably be quite a bit if items are being destroyed as part of this activity, and also making sure there's sufficient toilet facilities for those attending. Has that been considered, please?
Yeah, so in terms of the applicant did put in their sort of statement to support the application, which did go through kind of how they dispose of their waste. So that has been kind of justified by them effectively in terms of how they deal with that. I think on the indicative plan itself, it does show that there are some toilets as part of what they've proposed. As part of what they've proposed, I think they're actually already existing in the building themselves. But yeah, so they have effectively been covered.
So I think in terms of the proper disposal of waste, that is obviously dealt with by different legislation. So they will have to have a proper waste disposal company doing that. So I don't think they'll just be taking it down the recycling centre or something. So they'll have to do that on a commercial basis.
Councillor Folger.
Thank you, Chairman. Subject to the assurances which have just been given, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
We're still on questions at the moment, Roger. Are there any further questions to the officer on the presentation? No? Okay, then we'll take Roger's, moving the officer's recommendation. Yeah, okay. Does anybody else wish to speak before we go to the vote? All right, proposed and seconded that we go with the officer's recommendation. All in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And that brings us on to appeals on page 30.
I think I'll just talk you through some of those appeals because I think it's good news in terms of our appeals coming through at the moment. Significant number are being dismissed, and I'd like to hear some consistency coming from Planning Inspectorate, which is good news for us. So the first application in terms of decision made was on Skinner's Lane in Wroxham. That one was within the settlement boundary. The inspector agreed it would be harmful to the character and appearance of the area. It was a property which was tucked in behind an existing property, so backland with a driveway coming alongside an existing residential property. So the inspector also found that it would provide unacceptable living conditions for that existing property by virtue of that coming and going of traffic along that driveway, which basically came across the entire of that property. So that was good. And obviously nutrient neutrality was obviously added to that, being in the nutrient neutrality area. Secondly, the decision at Hainford, again, a good decision, well outside settlement limits. In this case, as we've seen a number of applications come to committee, a lack of continuous footpaths which were lit, poor access to bus services. So inspector has concluded that is an unsustainable location, and gave very limited weight to self-build, given that we are addressing our demand in relation to our development plan policies, and again nutrient neutrality for that. And a slight different one in terms of the last one, which is a change of use of cafe to a dwelling in Sow House, but interesting nonetheless in terms of dismissed on the basis of the loss of the community sort of cafe shop in terms of impact on the community, and secondly in terms of the floor space. So you'll hopefully won't see more of this because people won't be proposing small scale properties, but the national described space standards, so those minimum space standards for residential properties, so 1 bed 1 person property should be a minimum of 37 square meters. What was proposed in this case was 32 square meters, so well below that, and the inspector found harm in terms of unacceptable living conditions on those proposed occupiers of that. So again, some good decisions in terms of consistency for the council. Thank you.
Any comments on the appeals? Okay, good. Thank you. Well, today is a historic day. Thank you all for your contributions over the last 4 years, and this will be our last meeting in this building for planning. So thank you all very much, and I'll close the meeting.